Welcome to Birdsong with your host, Kayuda Kiora, exploring all things related to the path of shamanism, nature-based spirituality, truth-seeking, storytelling, awakening, health and wellness, earth-honoring traditions, ceremony, ritual, rites of passage, and of course, a remembering of the sacred ways. Hey guys, welcome to Birdsong. It's Kayuda here. In this episode, we have Adam Kellerman joining us. Now, Adam is quite frankly a remarkable human being, and the reasons I invited him on to be a guest become evident as I read out his bio, which essentially becomes some of the story he walks us through, from surviving cancer as a young teenager, having half of his pelvis removed, going on to play professional wheelchair tennis, which included 2 Paralympic Games in London and Rio, where he was ranked number 8 in the world and number 1 in Australia. But after a pivotal point in his career, he winded up doing charity work, both in Africa and here in Australia, and somehow went on to stop using his wheelchair and ended up on a grand journey to hike the very well-known and very challenging Kokoda Track in Papua New Guinea. On top of that, his life is intertwined with practices that cultivate a well-rounded approach when it comes to holistic health and wellness, which we explore throughout his story, including his connection to ceremony, ritual, facing death, honoring the sacred, connecting with nature, and many more of those threads. He is now a motivational speaker for schools and businesses, and he speaks to the importance of building resilience, overcoming adversity, and thriving through change. He also mentors cancer survivors, people with chronic pain, young adults, and he teaches standing meditation and calligraphy qigong, amongst all the other roles that he slips and slides into like we all do. I'll leave it at that for now. It was a real pleasure to sit down and weave in and out of Adam's own birdsong, and I trust you'll find value in our dialogue to carry with you on your own path forward. One of the first things that I've been touching on within these episodes, within Birdsong, is this idea. And you could really say that it's more of an idea. It's really a way of living. And this way of living, it has an emphasis on honoring the sacred. And as you know, typically when we open up a ceremonial or a ritualistic space, or we feel as though we're entering sacred space of some sort, we offer some words or thoughts or gestures, something in recognition of the sacred, of honoring the sacred. And I would love to ask you if you would be willing to share something in light of opening up our conversation and honoring the sacred, and also in relation to the words that you yourself might spill forth from the tip of your tongue to open up a ceremonial or ritualistic space. So the invitation has been put forth and the microphone is all yours, my friend.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. I'm just going to drop in, finding your breath, my breath. When I think about the sacred, I think about all there is, and that can be a very large amount of information to take in. So I like to bring it down to the most simple form, which is finding my center. And my center and your center exists roughly 3 finger lengths below the belly button, inside your body. Finding that point, the lower dantian, some traditions call it, and breathing deep into your belly. What's here now in the present moment is all that exists. And in that existence is sacredness. All we have to do is tune in to this moment. It can be as simple as that throughout the day. taking the time to take a conscious breath and find your center wherever you are. It can be in the middle of the city, it can be sitting in traffic. This center point, the center point of this physical existence, which connects us to our spiritual, greater existence. It's always there. There's never a point where we can't tap in. And from this center, we can move forward, backwards, sideways, in all directions, infinitely. And it allows us to let go of our mind and the stories we tell ourselves, dropping into a space that's deeper, the space that always has been and always will be present, whether we're tapped into it or not. So here we are.
Here we are, my friend. That was beautiful. Very grounding, very centering. And look, with all the previous guests and the future guests, I'm sure we will continue to tap into this same thread. And when it comes to honoring the sacred, that thread, it's through starting inside, finding our center, becoming present, and allowing the awareness to expand out from that space. And I feel as though this is something you have cultivated for many, many, many moons throughout your journey. And I know that your journey has been quite an incredible one. And something I wanted to dive straight into is one of your projects, and that is the Age of Ability. And now, from what I understand, towards the end of 2018, you, alongside Rani, I believe, who is the other half concerning the Age of Ability, now you both walked the Kokoda Trail. Now, walking the Kokoda Trail is a remarkable feat in and of itself. But on top of that, you helped raise, what was it, $56,000 for charity? And then what I find even more remarkable on top of that was the context in which it was done, because from a very early age, you were diagnosed with bone cancer, and that was in your right hip. And after, from what I understand, after many hospital visits and surgery, you had to have your right hip removed. So this is one of the reasons why I find you, Adam, just so incredibly inspiring, to go from such a severe physical health issue to hiking Kokoda Trail. It's a little bit of a mind boggler. And within our conversation, there are many things that I'd love to touch on, such as health and wellness practices, using adversity to your advantage, how hiking Kokoda has changed your outlook towards life in many different facets. But before we get into the heart of this dialogue, I'd love to hear some of your story.
Yeah. What a journey it's been. There's been many twists and turns, and it all started on the soccer field. I was an avid soccer player when I was a kid. I was really active in general, but soccer was my first love, my first true love. And one day when I was 13, just like every other Saturday in winter in Australia, I was on the soccer field when a really bad pain struck my right hip, and I couldn't finish the rest of the match. And that was actually the last soccer match that I'd ever play. I went to the physio, saw that the muscle in my leg had wasted, meaning it was visibly smaller and malformed. An X-ray showed that the texture of the bone had these lines through it rather than being completely smooth. and then an MRI showed a tumor, and the radiologist called my mum and I into the back room, and I didn't even know what a tumor was, but he pointed at the screen, and mum started crying, and I got pretty scared. And from that point, there was a bone biopsy which showed Ewing sarcoma, which is a bone cancer, and the tumor was about the size of a tennis ball, and it was in the ball and socket of my hip. Um, and I had no idea how my life was about to change. It was got turned upside down and round for forever.
Yeah, as
And
you could
it
imagine.
took me many years to find my center again after that point. And so treatment was chemotherapy and surgery. I had a major operation where, like you said, they actually removed half my pelvis, irradiated it outside the body at massive levels to kill all the cancer, and then put some of the bone back in with a partial hip replacement. Lots of bolts and screws holding it all together, and then I had more chemo afterwards. And on my second last round of chemo, an infection hit my right hip, and basically they spent another, long story short, they spent another 2 years of IV antibiotics and about 20 operations trying to save my hip. But at the end of the day, my body just rejected the hip replacement, and they ended up removing it completely. So that's what I still have today. I'm missing half of my pelvis. So my right leg is 7 centimeters shorter than my left, and the muscle is not as well formed and is not as strong. And for many years afterwards, I had severe chronic pain, and uh, and I was incredibly lucky that I feel like there was an angel by my side when one day I was on massive amounts of painkillers, but they weren't helping the pain anymore. And I went to the pain specialist, and they said basically, you can increase your dose, or you can start to get off and maybe try some other medications. And I was like, oh, I don't know what inspired me as a 15, 16-year-old to say, okay, I'm getting off. But I cut my dose in half for 1 week and then went cold turkey. And the withdrawals were an absolute killer. They were a nightmare. But after about 3 months, I woke up and it was like this fog had lifted. I was still in pain, but at least I had a clear mind, and I could start moving on in some respects.
Did you feel like that was a bit of a pivot point when you developed that clarity of mind to be able to see things from a bit of a different perspective moving forward?
It was. Looking back, it was. At the time, I didn't really see how much of an impact that would be, because there's throughout anyone's journey of recovery from anything, there are points where we can continue relying on external people, substances, healers, or whatever for our own healing, or we can take personal responsibility and start to unlock our own healing potential. And there's been so many people along the way who have helped my healing journey, but at the end of the day, it comes back to, they helped me unlock something within myself, which then enabled my body to heal. And that's something that we're all capable of. And it's one of the things I focus on is personal empowerment, empowering people to find that spark within themselves to heal themselves, rather than going to a doctor and relying on the pain medication, relying on the chiropractor, relying on lots of different things. And my family played such an important role. Like I have a brother who's 13 years younger than me, so he was 6 months old when I was diagnosed, and I have 2 other brothers as well. So I've got 3 brothers, and so the family unit. This was really not just a family, but a community effort for my survival. There wasn't a single night that I was alone in hospital at night. My mum or my dad or my uncle stayed one night in the hospital. And my grandma took time off work to look after my brothers at home. My dad he'd go to work during the day, come back to the hospital at night, sleep the night while mum went home to look after my brothers. Mum would come back in the morning, Dad would go to work, and it was just this cycle of, people in the community would help by cooking meals and taking my brothers to school and to sport. And so, yeah. And then the one really big part of the healing journey was when my parents took me to try wheelchair sport,
Okay.
because so I was a sportsman, and I couldn't play. I couldn't be active for 3 years. For 3 years, I was stuck in and out of a hospital bed, and even when I was home, I was, I'd lost my hair, I'd lost a lot of weight. The, the side effects from chemo and all the other drugs took their toll. But then when I came out the other side, and I still felt depressed. I was in chronic pain, and I couldn't play sport. So when my parents came to me one day and said, we found out about, wheelchair sport. Uh, they tried lots of different things to get me out off the couch. I played computer games for a lot of that time to distract myself, to take me into another world where I was, where no one could tell that there was, something different about me, or, yeah. But when the first time I sat in that wheelchair, and I started playing wheelchair tennis. I couldn't move the wheelchair to save my life. But if the ball was hit, right here, I had a pretty good forehand. Yeah, couldn't really hit a backhand, but I learned that along the way. But that was the pivotal moment where there was, a spark was lit within, and that was the start of the fire that gave me a lot of momentum in life.
And you ended up representing Australia in 2 Paralympic games from that point on.
Yeah. So I played for Australia in the London 2012 and Rio 2016 Paralympic Games, and at the World Championships for many, many more years.
Amazing. So I'm interested in some of your other key influences along the way. You obviously mentioned the support of your family, and already having that support, I imagine it would be quite hard to fathom what the healing journey would be like without having that community network and that support, because it is such a crucial part of all of our journeys, especially when we're on a healing journey or an integration journey from some kind of transformational or peak experience, whether that's peak experience in a painful and challenging way, or a peak experience in, like a consciousness expansive way. So I understand you had the family support. What other pillars were there along the way that helped you kind of keep moving forward into more of your health?
Yeah, big question. There's so many influences over the years. I mean, tennis was, a driving force. It gave me purpose. It inspired me and gave me hope for life, for the future. And through tennis, it enabled me to find people who were experts in their fields, and could, always look at any athlete is always looking for what's going to give me the edge, what's going to give me that extra 1%. And for me, I feel like the universe guided certain people into my life to help that healing journey, to get me to where I am today. And one of those key moments was in January 2012. For the year and a half before that, I was studying at the University of Arizona, playing on the wheelchair tennis team on scholarship, and I came home, took a year off studies to train for the Paralympics. I was ranked 61 in the world, and I needed to get inside the top 48 to qualify. And I started working with a new personal trainer. And well, I'll share a story of my favorite match. My favorite match was in Sydney, the Sydney International of that year. I got drawn against number 6 in the world, and I went home, told my dad. He was like, "All right, better luck next year." Uh, straight up. And I said, "Thanks, Dad. How about you give me some useful advice?" Yeah, and so he said, focus on 2 points at a time, and went out, and the next day and played some of the best tennis of my life. And at that point of my career, at 61 in the world, I didn't have any pressure on myself to beat number 6, who was also gold medalist from Athens Paralympics and silver medalist from Beijing. So there was, he was like one of my role models in the sport. He was,
and you were the underdog with just nothing to lose.
And with my friends and family on the sideline, cheering and supporting, I managed to win the match.
Amazing.
And so that one match took me from 61 to 46 in the world. So I qualified in the first month of the year,
Wow.
which was amazing. But part of the healing journey that started in January was I started with a new personal trainer who told me to cut out gluten and dairy to improve my results, my recovery speed, and my gains in terms of the gym and speed. And so nutrition has been a massive component of my journey. And it just started with that. Just try cutting out gluten and dairy and see what happens. And that opened up my world. As later that year, after the Paralympics, I went to a nutrition seminar where they were talking all kinds of stuff about nutrition, about the effect of refined sugar on the body, the effect of fluoride, the difference between grass-fed meat and grain-fed meat, and so much more. And this light bulb went off in my mind, saying, "Why has no one told me about this? This is really important." And I started looking into like anti-inflammatory diets and how to eat to heal. And it was amazing, because I started to feel more empowered and started to look at, okay, what am I putting into my body that could help me to heal? And so I slowly started shifting everything to be more in aligned with how I wanted to feel, and trying different things. And my parents were like, "Oh, Adam's going crazy because he's going so extreme with his diet." And I was like, "Yeah, but I can feel, if I have something that is inflammatory, I can feel like my pain the next day is more." Because I was in pain every single day. Every single day that I walked, I was in pain.
And it's almost like did you develop this hypersensitivity or this hyper awareness of what was happening on an internal physiological level, so you could notice the subtle differences in sensations and when pain would increase and decrease and things would shift in the body?
Yeah, absolutely. And as an athlete as well, like, just in terms of focus and in endurance, speed. And so in my experimentation, there was, I was kind of paying attention to how I was feeling in terms of pain levels, how I was feeling on emotional levels, and then also how I was feeling on and off the tennis court and with recovery and that kind of thing. So that whole journey has been huge and continues to, it's I went to some extremes in different ways, and now I've settled in a really nice dynamic and fluid place where I trust my body to tell me what it wants and when I need something. And just being able to uh, through training my sensitivity, be like, okay, I know that I can eat whatever I want, but I also know that it's going to make me feel different in certain ways. And so I eat based on how I want to feel most of the time. And then again, I like to say I follow a 99% rule. 99% I eat based on how I know that I want to feel, and 1% I do whatever I want, because I know that there's no point staying too extreme. There's no point in me being too hardline in any one direction, because it takes away the spice of life. it takes away that magic.
For sure. Yeah, understanding the consequences. And like you say, even within that 1% is still influencing us on, or still adding something to the collective sphere when it comes to our holistic health. It's, it's adding something on a soulful level or an emotional level, or it's enriching us and our taste buds, which is having an effect on our physiology in some way. So I would love to touch on more of what you consider to be the pillars, the fundamental aspects within your own life when it comes to holistic health. And you've already touched on some of it there. There's the nutrition, there's movement, there's the emotional stuff, there's mental, and of course there's the spiritual side as well. But continuing along this trajectory, how did you go from being such an elite Paralympic athlete to walking the Kokoda Trail?
Yeah, well, I suppose I'll just follow the chronology of one of the pillars that you mentioned. The emotional world. In 2013, I started working with an incredible masseuse who worked in healing cellular trauma, and basically, when I was sick, there was so much physical trauma happening and I didn't have any tools to deal with the emotional side of things at the same time. And so it was stored in my body. So our cells have memory, and uh, it holds on to the memory until we either clear it or change it or you know heal it in some way. And that there's so many different ways to do that, but this was the start of my learning how to manage and process my emotions. She taught me that it's okay to be feeling what I was feeling, whatever that was. And at the time I was completely repressed. I had was in and out of depression a lot, even through my tennis journey. um, so learning that what I was feeling is okay, and no matter what that was. And then also, a key part of that is also learning how to express that in a healthy way. And so that's been I think that's a lifelong journey, really. It's not something you ever fully master. But she gave me the key by saying, it's like, by holding space and helping me to deal with some of the deep traumas that were stored in my body from that time. Um, and also as a masseuse, helping me move physically and unlocking the tension that had stored, because just like we have coping mechanisms, our body has coping mechanisms. Our body, if we have an injury, our body starts uh, adjusting so to avoid that injury. And so I was in massive amounts of chronic pain, so my body naturally did whatever it could to avoid that pain. And so the next pillar is movement. In the about 2015, I met one of my movement teachers, named Benny Ferguson, the movement monk. And yeah, so he's been one of the key people that has helped me learn how to move again, and starting with tension release meditation at the four difficulties. So there's lying down, sitting, standing, and moving. And each of those layers has different different level of difficulty in each of those. So if you can't relax fully when you're lying down flat, how can you do it when you're sitting or standing? But the standing part of that has been the most critical for my healing, because when I first started standing, I was in pain just standing normally. So standing still was excruciating. And when I first started, about 2 minutes was the max. And through learning to relax even in that pain, by learning to observe that pain and just be present with it, just hold it there and be like, okay, there's nothing wrong. This is just what my body is showing me. It's a signal that has been trained over many, many years, and by allowing that to come through. It's like, the way I look at it now is, when we feel angry, if we can really feel that anger and express it in a healthy way, then it comes and it goes pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't express it or feel it or let it go in some way, it stays in our body and it'll come up again later, or will stay in our body.
And as you said, then we start to get into the rabbit hole of trauma and developing that cellular memory of the anger not being able to express itself.
Absolutely. And so I see pain as the same thing. When we give it space to be there, to make pain isn't wrong. Pain isn't bad. Pain is a signal from our body to pay attention. There's something going on. And, naturally, I'm missing half of my pelvis. So there was a lot of pain to navigate. But this is true for anyone with an ache in their ankle, or, a sore back, sore neck. These are signals that are coming up for us to be like, hey, look over here, pay attention, because the pain is probably just a symptom of a movement pattern that has been picked up to cover something much deeper. And so through the years, yeah.
I was going to ask you a question about this process before you get on to what you were going to say, and that is the way that one way of articulating it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it developing our sensory awareness to more subtle and more nuanced degrees so we can tune into what is happening in our body, the sensations, and if we are feeling any pain anywhere, for people with chronic illnesses or injuries, it is allowing ourselves to relax deeper into that process, and that's where the tension release comes into it, and it's through relaxing into it that it may open up a space for whatever is perhaps behind that or beneath it, or that very thing itself, to become known to us so we can better process it.
Absolutely, that's a great way of putting it. Essentially, it's an opportunity to get to know ourselves better, on a deeper level, our bodies, how we move, how we think, because the pain can be there from a thought pattern, from an emotional pattern, from something that happened many years ago that we then copied. And so if we have a thought that thoughts can create tension in our body, if over time that thought becomes more and more regular, say, it's a regular cause of anxiety, how does that show up physically? Generally, there's a certain holding pattern, like people holding their shoulders up,
or clamping their jaw really tight,
or clamping their jaw really tight. And then how does that clamping their jaw affect their hips or the rest of their body? We're so interrelated. It's like, I think there's no separation between mind, body, emotions. There's a dynamic interplay that is constantly weaving and impacting each other. And this is why the daily practices in my life are so critical and key to the healing that I've gone through, and what I share with other people in their own, when I'm trying to support people in their healing journeys.
So continuing along the mountain trail, you were going from nutrition to movement, and then what was the next step to get you closer to Kokoda Trail?
The next step was injury. An injury in my right shoulder. I was training for the Rio Paralympics. I was at the height of my career, playing the best tennis. I'd reached my career high ranking of 8 in the world. I was in Japan at the World Championships and went to hit a high forehand, reached up to hit it, and in that moment felt something just switch, and it probably wasn't as bad at first, and I kept playing. I finished that match, played the next day. By that point, it was very inflamed, but my team needed me. It was, we were playing for a position in the semi-final, And when you're playing for a position in the semi-final and you're being asked to play for Australia, you got to step up.
Sure.
And looking back, that probably wasn't the wisest move, given the schedule that I had moving forward. But it's what happened, and the injury got worse that day, and ended up being an injury in two places in my right shoulder, which was my playing shoulder. And so from that point forward, I didn't know if I was even going to be able to make it to the Paralympics. It was about 3 months before the Paralympics that the injury happened, and so I instead of continuing with tournaments, I went home into recovery and didn't even touch my racket for almost 2 months leading up to the Paralympics. So it was a big period of uncertainty.
Was this a moment that you were quite devastated by, or had you already picked up some mental and emotional skills to kind of allow it to unfold in more of a graceful kind of manner?
Bit of both. For a couple of weeks, I was completely devastated. From the first time I went to the World Championships and found out that we could play in the Paralympics, I'd set my goals to, go to London 2012 for the experience, and then try and win a medal in Rio 2016. So it was a 10-year journey to get to Rio, and then just gone in that moment of injury. And so for a couple of weeks, I definitely let myself feel all the pain and the loss of knowing that there was no chance I was going to win a medal from that point forward at that Paralympics anyway. After a couple of weeks, a lot of it, just feeling it, allowed it to move through. And one of the things I say when I'm speaking to schools or businesses or in my motivational speaking is that with every challenge in life, there is an opportunity. And if you're not seeing the opportunity, then just wait, because it's always there. There's always an opportunity that comes with challenge, because it gives you something. It changes something. It takes something away, but it gives you something else. And so the opportunity that presented itself to me was that instead of being in Europe, I was at home in Sydney when one of my sponsors came to me and asked me, told me about a charity that they were supporting over in Tanzania. And this charity, they hired and trained people with disabilities to create these amazing products. The charity is called Nima Crafts. We can put a link in the show notes. Just beautiful products, and they're all made by people with disabilities. And now they also build houses for their staff, because living in Tanzania with a disability is a little different to living in Australia with a disability. And I mean, there's a conversation around the word disability in general, but I think that's a topic for a bit later.
Yeah, that's a fox den to explore, no doubt.
Yeah. So when I had this meeting with my sponsor, I told them that 3 years prior to that at the World Championships, the Tanzanian wheelchair tennis team won a wild card, and I was watching them play, and they had really heavy, outdated equipment, and they didn't have a chance basically to win any matches, or they were still having a great time. But in that moment when I saw them, I also thought about the fact that I had 3 or 4 old wheelchairs in my garage and about 30 rackets that weren't being used, that I had been given from my sponsors. And I was like, I can do something for these guys. I don't know how, I don't know when. And so in that meeting, when I shared this story with them, they said, "Oh, great, we're going to send you with a couple of our staff." And then I asked if we could send a videographer as well to film it and create a little documentary. And they said, "Yeah, great." So we went over. I took 5 wheelchairs, 70 rackets, as much other equipment and clothes. I had actually put two of the guys that were traveling with us in wheelchairs so that we could take the wheelchairs over there for free, rather than because the airline was going to charge us freight, and that's
Clever.
really expensive. So yeah, and then had like massive bags full of sports clothes, and going over there was a pivotal moment for many reasons, which I'll get to. But when I landed there and I started seeing, it felt like I was on Mars because it was so different to Australia. I'd never been to a developing country before. So it was very eye-opening in the way that just how blessed we are in Australia, and any developed country. We're so lucky, and it's one thing that I kept coming to me the entire time is like how these people over there that literally every day is a fight for survival in some respects, but they still have massive smiles on their faces. And when I was visiting this charity, and seeing this guy who couldn't walk push his hand cycle to and from work 2 hours each way so that he could earn a living to feed his 4 children and his wife, and hear about how his work was the best out of anyone's in the entire place. And then to meet him, and I had the opportunity to share my story with all the staff at this charity, and to see them in tears, and then hear their stories and be like, wow, to have them inspired by my journey. And it moved me in a way that yeah,
lasting consequences on your path forward.
Yeah. And so, but another way that it was pivotal is that there was an Australian man there who was there to make sure everything went smoothly for, he was connected with the company that sponsored me, and he also ran a separate charity over there. He looked at me after hearing my story, and so one part that I haven't mentioned yet is that while I could walk, as I have mentioned, that I was in high amounts of chronic pain. And so in 2010, I got a wheelchair for everyday use rather than just a wheelchair for tennis use. I got one so that I could move about on a day-to-day basis without being in pain. And that was a game-changing decision, because up until that point, walking around every day, I was exhausted all the time. I couldn't focus. I was in so much pain. So when I went into the wheelchair, there was a sense of freedom, because I didn't have to be in as much pain. I could still walk around my house. I could still walk short distances when I wanted to, but any kind of distance longer than 100 or 200 meters, I used this wheelchair. And so in Africa, I was in the wheelchair, but I did walk short distances as well. So he saw me, heard my story, and then walked up to me and asked me straight to my face, Adam, would you like to walk the Kokoda Track with me to raise money for charity?
Did you give him a bit of a sideways look? A bit of a strange look?
I was speechless. I had nothing to say. I was like, what's this guy smoking? I want some.
For sure. Well, yeah, from the position that you're in and just coming up with that kind of suggestion, it's it's a bit of a leap to make, isn't it? How on earth could one go from this to walking the Kokoda Trail?
Yeah. So basically, when he asked that, straight away, the feeling in my body was yes. Nothing but yes. It was Adam. It was spirit coming through me saying, Adam, you need to do this because it's going to take you on a journey, and it's going to be amazing. And
it was that calling, and it's a calling that many of us know. It's beyond the rational, logical mind. It's something that we feel inside. It's like that soulful tingling, that just resonates through on an intuitive level.
Yeah. It's like if you know in that moment that if you were to say no, you'd be going against every fiber of your intuition and your greater self. And so I mean, he gave me a couple of days to think about it, but I pretty much said yes on the spot. And planned to work out the details of how it was all going to work later.
So before we go any further, I would love for you to just drop a little explanation, because I know what Kokoda Trail is. You obviously know what it is, but there may be listeners tuning in who don't really have that much of a reference point for Kokoda Trail.
Yeah. So the Kokoda Trail or Track is a 137 kilometer, or roughly 137 kilometer track in Papua New Guinea. And in World War II, the Australians fought the Japanese there. The Japanese were coming down through Asia and taking over as much as they could. And so they were trying to use Papua New Guinea as a platform to then attack Australia, and they had attacked Australia. And Papua New Guinea at that point was actually still Australian territory. So there was, so there was a big battle there, and the Australian soldiers were under-resourced and not as well supported as they could be, and outnumbered. And we had very little chance of winning, but we ended up winning. But the track itself it goes all the way through Papua New Guinea, through the steepest, slipperiest mountains, like rainforest, mud. There's really thick and challenging terrain. So just taking a moment to acknowledge the soldiers that fought and died there, all the lives that were lost. But how they managed on that track with all their equipment and hardly any food, I have no idea. Because so when I was asked to walk it, I didn't really know all that much about it. I didn't know what it was going to take. But when I got home from Africa, I put my wheelchair in storage, and I haven't sat in it since.
Wow. And that was obviously another pivot point for you to encompass and embody a whole different level of what it means to walk a path in alignment to holistic health, because I imagine your daily practices would have had to have shifted dramatically in one way or another to be prepared to walk this arduous trek.
Absolutely. There was the standing meditation, but there was so many other bits and pieces that were involved in making the Kokoda Track a reality. But the simplest way, when people ask me, how did you do it? It's one step at a time. How do you achieve anything? It's one step at a time. What is the smallest thing I can do today that's going to help this bigger vision? And at the time that I started, at the time that I came home and put my wheelchair away, walking even 1 kilometer was a stretch, and a painful stretch. I had an amazing team in my corner that were helping me move more effectively, and it was not an easy path to follow.
Yeah, I imagine physically, mentally, emotionally, it would have been testing on ways that I really don't have a reference point for. But what were some of the greater challenges? I guess either you can answer that either in preparing or perhaps walking the actual trail itself.
I think one of the biggest challenges was believing that it was possible. Like there was a deep knowing in me that it was possible, because that's the path that I was walking. And but there was another part of me, the mind has a lot of fear, and when I hadn't walked further, the longest walk I had done from 13 years old up until that point was a 5-kilometer walk in 2012, where I ended up in bed for a week afterwards because my body was cramping and in a world of pain. I could hardly move. And so that thought kept coming to me as like, what if I can't do it?
And how many
And what
days
if
did it take you? to walk Kokoda
We
Trail?
we did it in 8 days.
Yeah, that's an incredible feat.
So yeah, believing, and I mean, on the track itself was there was a range of challenges, which comes down to you're sleeping in a tent on a little air mattress, walking 15 to 18 kilometers per day up and down steep hills, and but man, was it beautiful. It was the most beautiful terrain that I have ever been in, ever seen. And not seeing a car for 8 days. You just, the only way to get anywhere is walking through the jungle and going through these little villages. And but yeah, from day 5, the pain levels were very, very intense, and so managing that each day was the biggest challenge. And
so were you carrying all of your gear? Did you have porters that were carrying things up there for you?
We had porters, so I was carrying as little as possible. And we all had the choice as to whether we wanted a porter or not, but for me it was a challenge enough just walking it without having to worry about carrying
No doubt.
lots of equipment. Yeah.
I'm interested in what you were eating on the trail, because I imagine your diet would have been so spot on, or at least pretty aligned nutritionally, and I imagine there would have had to have been a change taking place. You can't carry all the new, the dense nutrient rich foods that we would probably be eating on a regular basis on something like the Kokoda Trail.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, there was not much nutrition in the food that we were eating. It was very carb heavy and not very protein rich either. So I mean, we brought snacks and stuff, nuts and protein bars and biltong and different things that would help us get that extra bit of nutrition. But in terms of the food that they provided on the track, it was just enough to get us through. And but that was part of the journey as well. It's like remembering that the soldiers had almost nothing. There's a walking that track for Australians, for anyone who's listening, is there's big honoring, walking that path and walking through sites that hundreds of people lost their lives to maintain the freedom that many of us get to enjoy here in this country today. And while I'm anti-war in as many ways as a person can be, still honoring life itself and the path that they walked, and the young men that lost their lives was an important part. And so when you hear about people who are injured, for me, missing half my pelvis, and for Rani having survived 3 brain hemorrhages, and we were walking that track with not fully able-bodied as most people would, but that gave us a chance to honor the people who were injured on the track and still had to find their way home somehow. Yeah, so the food, every part of it was, in a way, it was an 8-day ceremony, because there was an honoring of our journey, and there was an honoring of their journey, and there was the team that we went through the team that we went with was amazing. So it was an honoring of what it means to work together as a team. Some days one of us was having a good day, and the next day one of us was having a bad day, and everyone would rally around each other.
Yeah, it sounds like a very dynamic, interwoven, experiential learning process that you went through.
Definitely was. You're you're in it. Once you start, you're in it for the long haul. There's no other way out.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And I could imagine that spending time in this landscape, and not only this beautiful pristine landscape, but the opposite side of that, the polarity of having that beauty, but then the historical context of many people going through the hardships of war, like you speak to, and falling ill to disease, and the brutal and bloody nature of combat. And also this in conjunction with your own personal health issues for many years. What I'm weaving towards here is, how has this informed your relationship to dying and death, and then also your relationship to honoring the sacred? And I'd love to hear a little bit of the evolution or your relationship towards those things in regards to topics that are often considered taboo, and often shielded away. We often shield ourselves away, at least from a Western contemporary culture. So I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
yeah. I mean, it's a big question, weaving in death and the sacred. So I'll start with death, and we can make our way to the sacred. I mean, death is sacred as well. It's part of life. My perspective on death was, started forming when I was, when I had cancer. And there were parts where I almost died. There were parts where I really wanted to die. And many times in between then and when I was walking the track, that there were contemplations on death, and on you know taking my life for many years, thoughts. And when I was sick, actually, as a 13-year-old, and after the first major operation, I tried to take my life. And it was my mum who walked in and freaked out, understandably. And that's kind of what made me realize that I need to survive, not just for myself, but for her and for my family, my dad and my brothers and my grandma. And so that was the driving force for my survival at that point. But for many years after, there were contemplations with death. And just at at one point I realized that while I didn't ever reach the point again where I was actually considering taking action on it, for a long time there was a conversation and an acknowledgement that at any point I could. And that what that meant for me was, it was a way to empower myself, because that means by choosing not to, I'm choosing life. I'm choosing to live. And if I'm choosing life, then I may as well choose the best, most inspired and empowered life I possibly can, and doing what I love to do, and you know trying to be the best version that I can possibly be of myself, and not for myself, not in a selfish way, but so that I realized many years ago that I lived through that experience to be of service, to help other people, whether that's with a smile on the street, or through sharing my story and inspiring someone to think about their life in a new way, to get some perspective on that maybe their challenges that they're going through aren't that bad, or that the things that they're focused on, it's not effective, at to feel the way that they want to feel in life. Really, how can you pivot your thinking, your perspective, to see that all of life is a gift? And one of the things that I'd love to say is that if I can embrace the worst day of my life as equal to the best day of my life, then every day in between is easy. And but how can people accept and embrace the worst day of their life, when sometimes that can, sometimes the most causes of traumatic experiences come from those days. And that's the work, that's the deep, dark, not pretty, when we can get in there and really start to integrate those most challenging days where we want to die, where we want to give up, we just don't want to do it anymore. If we can integrate and accept, embrace, and start to love and be grateful for those days, that's when life opens up in a whole new way. And so bringing that round to death is like, I'm not ready to die, but I do look forward to it, because I know that when it does happen, I haven't held back. I've done everything I can to the best of my ability, and I'll have earned it. And I also believe that the spirit, it lives on, and this physical form and this physical existence is much more expansive than I can possibly ever comprehend in my mind and in my body. And there's so much more and mystical, and I suppose this is where we can take it to the sacred, is like, how do we bring sacredness into every single day? um you know and I think it comes back to remembering where we come from, whether that is God, source, spirit, whatever name you want to give it. And then on a more physical, tangible level, the earth, the sun, the moon, the stars, acknowledging that, that we are the earth. We are the, you know, while maybe a more evolved consciousness than certain animals that are in the wild. We have different brains and different brain waves and different ways of thinking and moving, and we build these houses to separate ourselves from the earth. We are still part of the earth. Everything that we have created is part of the earth.
I had fundamental recognition to be able to hold that one, not seeing ourselves from earth, but seeing that we are of the earth. We are actually, the earth's little fingers popping up and living our lives, spreading out from the soil and moving about on part of the belly, the skin of our great earth mother, walking about doing our thing. Yeah, fundamental recognition when it comes to all of these things that we're speaking of, honoring the sacred, honoring the life that we live. And of course, as you speak to, intertwined within that is, well, it's this speaking to the importance of remembering our roots, remembering our connection to nature, to spirit, to the mystery, and of course to death as well. And I love everything that you're speaking to, and it makes me reflect on my own relationship to death as a trusted ally, the greatest teacher in many, many ways. Always, if we can recognize death sitting right there on our shoulder, whispering in our ear that it could be our moment to transition into whatever's next at any time. There is never any guarantees as to how many breaths we're going to take, how many more sunrises or sunsets that we're going to bear witness to. And that doesn't, I don't think it should be a what's the word I'm looking for? Macabre, maybe. A grim outlook towards life, being able to hold death like that. But it's death showing us the beauty within all of life and the life that we could live if we choose it, as you speak to.
Absolutely. The closer that we can stay to death, in whether it's in our thoughts or in whatever way, is makes us feel more alive. And I, in my adult life, I've never had any near-death experiences as an adult, or but I've had some one of my friends passed away a few years ago, and one of my friends' husbands passed away. And in those moments where those people are on that veil, close to death, there's something incredible about those moments where people are either crossing over, close to crossing over, or are close to someone who's crossing over, because they're all the all the things that are not important fall away, and all that's left is the importance within life. And in some ways, that what's happening with COVID and Corona, that has caused many people to remember what is the critical, what is really important, letting go of all the things that are not important, and reconnecting to the earth, whether it's through the garden or through having the time to take more walks, spending more time with family. There's been a big letting go in this process that I think is similar, as and many people, there has been a lot of death in our world around this COVID. And as much as there's all the different theories around what's really happening, with every challenge there is an opportunity, and the opportunity that is here is still very much present, in that we get to choose very consciously how we move forward.
Yeah, this speaks to something that I wanted to touch on with you, which is finding advantage within adversity. And I've seen you mention something to this degree on one of your recent social media posts. You were talking about building resilience and managing change and growing through adversity. And this ties back into what we were touching on before. How do we hold the most challenging days and the most beautiful, blissful, nourishing, profound days? How do we hold them and breathe them in the same breath? And of course, to be able to do that is we have to learn how to become resilient and to overcome adversity and to find the medicine within that. And that's the way that I kind of language this thing that you're speaking to, which is finding the opportunities, the perspective shifts. Whatever presents itself to us with the right perspective, there is always some form of medicine in there for us. So, in the context of yourself wanting to offer these teachings and your wisdom around managing change and building resilience and overcoming adversity, I saw that you want to pass this on to the younger generation. I would love to hear a little more on this because, as we're speaking to, these are timeless concepts that every single human has to navigate in one way or another. And we all have our struggles and we all have our challenges. And, as Joseph Campbell speaks directly to, we're all individual expressions in one way or another of the hero with 1,000 faces. There's a hero's journey that we all have to take, and many heroes' journeys within our own lifetime, which includes facing the challenges and overcoming the adversity. So what do you have to articulate surrounding all of these topics, in particular passing that on to the younger generation?
Yeah, this is what I love to do the most, is to pass on the I want to start with just saying that there's a lot of people that I have found can't relate to my journey, because I got really sick as a teenager. There's something that happened to me that doesn't happen to everybody. But the starting point is that anyone can learn from someone who has gone through that journey. We can learn from our elders and from people who have gone through massive challenges. So you can learn from them so that you don't have to go through that challenge. And so that when challenge does hit in life, because challenge is inevitable in one form or another in life, we're all going to find ourselves in some adversity of various kinds in our life. And the medicine I feel that we all need to, or that many need to embrace, is that how do we prepare ourselves for that? There's knowing that it's not an if, it's a when we're going to be hit with adversity, whether it's through someone dying, or whether it's through getting sick, or whether it's through something like this virus happening and us all being thrown into this unstable economy and world that we live in. It's like, how do we prepare ourselves for that kind of challenge? And the answer lies in, I see the rites of passage is incredibly important, looking at how the Aboriginals go on walkabout, and how from a man's perspective, I don't know, from a woman's perspective, they get sent out and to walk the land, and then come back when they've learned what they need to learn. And if they haven't learned what they need to learn, they get sent out again. And so how do we bring that into our modern world? And it takes discipline, and we have to use this evolved consciousness that we have all been gifted to train this this physical vessel to be able to manage the challenges that come with life. And one of the ways that I personally do it is through taking away the things that some of the things that make me so comfortable. For example, practicing fasting, sleeping on the floor when I have a perfectly good bed, just putting myself into uncomfortable positions, and not going from 0 to 10, not going out and doing something crazy like going and sleeping under a tree without anything for like Vision Quest. I've never done a Vision Quest. I do look forward to doing it, but I'm not there yet. But looking at the things that, okay, what are the things that I can't live without? What does it look like to go without my phone for a day or a week? Like, how can people bring these ideas into our everyday life, looking at the things that could happen one day? The technology. What if the internet stops working? What are people going to do if they're addicted to this technology? And then there's a whole conversation around addiction to technology, addiction to food, addiction to our various comforts and certain drugs, and whatever our addictions are. When we have an addiction to something, then the substance or the thing has our power, has our strength. It owns us, a part of us, whether it is the comfortable things, or whether it's a drug or coffee or whatever it is. We need to claim our power back from those things. And the only way to do that is to train ourselves, enter a state of training, saying, okay, I'm going to go for a walk without my phone, starting small, introducing these tiny discomforts. And it's an interesting one for parents as well. To if a kid wants to go for a walk without their phone, sometimes the parents freak out. It's like, what did you do when you were younger? You didn't have a phone. You went, I remember going on bike riding for hours on the weekends without being contactable, and I'd be home when I was home. And if something happened, then something happened, and I'd be okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's part of the conditioning of our times, isn't it? With just with the entire environment that we find ourselves in, with the media and the news and the sensationalism and the focus on the fear-based culture.
Yeah. And, just to take it back to part of the beginning of our conversation about like the training begins when it's a way to get to know ourselves on a much deeper level, when we see, okay, what makes me uncomfortable? How can I step in? How can I train myself to actually thrive off that feeling, even when it scares me shitless? Like, for me, still making videos is an edge. I don't like it. I don't like making videos, but I constantly pushing that edge. Right now I'm going through a phase of sleeping on the floor at my friend's place. Even though he's away and his bed is there, I'm sleeping on the floor. And it's just like, when I do sleep on a bed after this, I'm going to be so grateful for that comfort, that bed, that, you know, that holding.
Yeah, and this is such a pivot. This is such a impertinent point that you're touching on now as well, bringing gratitude into the picture.
Yeah. And I think that, human beings are so incredibly adaptable. We adapt to our environment no matter where or what we are. You go to a developing country and they're living in these smallest spaces and they make it work. They adapt to that. We look at them with pity, saying that they're in poverty. And yeah, there's, compared to where we're from, it is poverty, but for them it's survival, it's life. And so we adapt to our environment, and so it's important to remember to be grateful. And the way we can do that is by taking things away and giving them back. Consciously training gratitude by gifting ourselves space from an object, from a thing, and then bringing it back and being like, oh, that was difficult, that wasn't easy, but now I've got it back. And it's like, I remember going 3 months without chocolate.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because that's
I-
what I was just thinking.
I am a complete chocoholic. I have such a big sweet tooth, unashamedly, but I still go periods where I'm like, okay, I've been eating too much lately. I'm taking it for granted. I'm just going to go without it for a few months, uh, going without sex, going without masturbation, really honoring the temple that is our sexual energy. And, there's so many different ways to introduce this concept. It's, and for many of you listening, that there's something that's come to mind, saying, I know I need to go without this for a little while. I know I need to take a break. That's the thing. Or maybe it's the thing that you're thinking, I could never go without this. Maybe it's the thing that you think, I could never go without my phone. What if someone needed me? Finding that edge, that's the one.
Yep. Let that thing be thy needle point of thy compass. And I love this idea of whatever it is that we're feeling resistance to, whatever we know is going to bring the discomfort, or whatever's going to be unpleasant or challenging. Let the needle point of our compass guide us in that direction, because we're never going to experience the growth or the expansion that's intertwined with who we could become as human beings.
That's the medicine. And in terms of like finding, how can we embrace the darkest days of our lives, it's the same thing as finding ways to remember, finding ways to not to push away the emotions and the sensations when it comes up, because it always, if we've been repressing something, it always gives us opportunities to see it again, because we want to be healed. Our bodies and our minds and our souls, we want to be healed. And so things come up for us to look at. And if we keep pushing it away, what we resist persists. And it's not easy to embrace those uncomfortable sensations, but it's so incredibly important, because it's part of life. Pain is part of life. And for me and my journey, pain has been one of the most incredible teachers. How to deal with the dark and the light, and weave between the worlds, and have gratitude for the good days and the bad days. It's because I've been to the edge of the cliff. I've looked over, and I've stayed there for a while, and I've looked, and I've really sat on the edge and got to know that cliff edge. And I've made my choice, and I choose to just I know where the edge is. And I'm always, it's always in my awareness that life is such a gift. And if you don't have that perspective, then how can you get that perspective?
I love it. There's just there's so much. There's so much in all of what you're saying, so much to reflect upon, so much wisdom to receive. And I feel like we could continue on with the ins and outs of this dialogue for a long time. I love receiving what you have to say. But before we start kind of weaving ourselves back full circle, one thing I would love to ask you about, and this is somewhat on a little bit of a tangent, but still interwoven with the greater topics of what we're talking about when it comes to honoring the sacred and going through adversity and putting ourselves in discomfort. The thing that I'm interested in is, what's your take on the importance, if you do feel like there is any importance, when it comes to ceremony and ritual, or ceremonializing and ritualizing the things that we do on a daily basis? And secondarily to that, are there any ceremonial practices or rituals that you're resonating with within your own life right now?
Yeah, great question. It's interesting how I feel like it interrelates, in that, you know, that I see it relating to how when we take something away, it can be seen as a ceremony to reintroduce it. There's a you know there's a unplanned ritual in my life of taking things away and giving them back. Uh, 6 weeks ago I did a week-long water fast, and reintroducing food was so amazing. And I've done earlier this year a 3.5-day dry fast, no food, no water. And you know to learn how to appreciate water, clean water, the life force that we need, given from Pachamama. um, so that And also just the ritual of my practices: meditation, movement, writing, finding creative ways to express what is in and on my heart. These are all incredibly important to me in my life and my well-being, uh, and ceremony. There's I haven't spoken publicly about ceremony before, and I see all of life in some respects as a ceremony. But then there are times when I enter sacred space for periods of time, and disconnect from the world, completely disconnect somewhere in nature, and enter like a deeper space of ceremony, where I can always connected to nature. Um, and for me, part of that learning is sitting with ayahuasca, and the amazing plant medicine has been an incredibly impactful part of my journey as well, the last few years. And yeah, that's been one of my biggest teachers the last few years.
Yeah, I like what you were saying. Paradoxically, we need to disconnect from the external world and all that it brings, with all of the distractions that we're subject to, in order to be able to reconnect on a much more expansive, deeper internal level. And I wanted to get your take on that, because we touched on a few of the pillars when it comes to physical health, obviously the nutrition and the movement, and then the importance of being able to work with and process our emotions, and the importance of developing a solid foundation when it comes to working with the adversities of the mind. Obviously, doing that through putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations, and there's many ways that we can develop these things. But of course, the ceremony and the ritual plays into the spiritual nourishment when it comes to holistic health as well.
Absolutely. And there's a whole other aspect of ceremony, which, comes from my roots, being raised Jewish, and, Friday night Shabbat dinners, and, the religious holidays has been, amazingly ceremonial, especially this last year or so, as for a long time, I pushed away all aspects of the religion, and because I couldn't connect with certain parts of it, and so I pushed away the whole thing, and so that I could approach it with fresh eyes. And in the last couple of years, being able to approach again and really see, okay, there are certain parts that are incredibly beautiful within the culture of the Jewish religion, and one of them being the importance of family coming together to share meals. And every Friday night meal that I share with my family is a ceremony. Um, and there's so many layers of ceremony within a meal, that from preparing the food to saying the blessings before the meal, and to playing the game of Scrabble afterwards. It's there's that all these
Mm,
all these layers of the ceremony of life, and that all weave together.
yeah, I love that, mate. I think this is a good place for us to start wrapping things up. But before we get to that stage, I wanted to ask you if there is anything else that we haven't touched on that is most alive for you right now. If there's anything that is singing out to you for your utmost attention.
What's really alive for me right now is, my movement practices, uh, but also just I'm just feeling a lot of fire around. Um, I want people to heal. People who are living in pain, people who are suffering with different conditions, and haven't found the thing that has helped them to heal. It's like there are, what we're capable of is so much more than we know in our mind, than what we've been told by doctors and other healers. Like our potential is continuously awakening. And I see a lot of people who are suffering in certain ways, and it's in I feel for them, because I suffered for many years, and it's not always clear the path forward. There's a lot of noise in and information overload about try this and try that. And but I think that there's a lot of people who have surrendered to the fact that they're going to have to live with whatever the suffering is in their life forever. And I thought I was going to be in chronic pain forever. I lived with it for 15 years. Every single day I knew when I woke up in the morning and took my first step whether it was going to be a good day or a bad day. And through standing meditation, training for Kokoda, learning calligraphy qigong, which I now teach, and through many other things, I walk around today completely pain free. And something that I never thought was possible. And I think that we all have this incredible potential within us to heal, and like I really want to activate people who are going through that journey, that struggle, to heal themselves, because they can then activate and inspire the people in their family, community, the people in their direct circles. And, that's what's burning on my heart at the moment is, yeah.
Yeah, I can feel the fire and the inspiration and the passion coming from you, mate. Yeah. So is there anywhere where you would like to direct people so they can find out more about your work or any of these projects that are bubbling up, whether that's website, social media, and anything that you mention, I'll put in the show notes.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of things that are kind of being created right now, and so there's not places. But if you want to follow me or anything that I'm up to, then Facebook or Instagram is just my name, Adam Kellerman, and then the website that is about to be updated is theageofability.com, and there's also Facebook and Instagram for the Age of Ability. Yeah, those are the places, and there's lots of projects moving right now, and all being divinely guided and divinely timed, and it's been an amazing process bringing them into being, and having I'm feel very honored and grateful to when you asked me to be on, to share my birth song, and just want to say thank you for sharing all your medicines and your great big smile and your heart, and I'm honored.
Yeah, big appreciation for that. I am mirroring back that inspiration to you, and I'm looking forward to seeing what is emerging from your heart space. So, Adam, just as we opened up our dialogue, our conversation with some beautiful words, I would love to, in light, of what this entire birdsong creation is about, honoring the sacred and ceremony and ritual and all the threads that we touched on within our conversation, I'd love to invite you to share some words to close up the container that we've co-created. But I've been putting a little bit of a twist on things. And the twist is, in closing, if you were to make an offering, and this offering was, let's say, your last 30 seconds or so, which could be a speech or a prayer or blessings or words, and you were offering them to family, friends, loved ones, to nature, to Great Spirit, a great mystery, what might those 30 seconds sound like?
Know how to put a guy on the spot. I'd say to open up a space within all of your hearts to connect to, in this moment, with this breath, to feel every cell within your body flowing with life force gifted from this planet, this beautiful Pachamama, and from the source, the creator, and to plant the seed of gratitude within your heart for all of the dark and all of the light and everything in between. And with each breath, there is the opportunity for presence, gratitude, peace, and love. We get to choose all of those moments and what we bring to it.
Aho to that.
Aho, brother.
I put you on the spot as I knew that there would be beautiful words that would flow forth from your heart, and you did exactly that. So thanks once again for joining me, Adam. It's much appreciated.
Thank you. Thanks again.